You know what the most dangerous thing in America is, right? Nigga with a library card.
This is the Most Dangerous Thing in America podcast, a show in which we read books by black authors and they're talked about by black. You can listen if you are black or not black. That is okay. It has been months since I've done a podcast. I was working on a project. That project is still ongoing, but I finally carved out some time to get back to the podcast, which will become a monthly podcast. It used to be bi-monthly. It'll now be monthly. And this month we're reading a 2015 novel, The Sellout by Paul Beatty. It won the Booker Prize. It was heavily acclaimed. People loved it. New York Times said it was one of the 10 best books of the year. And I did not like it at all. But we'll get into that in just a moment. Well, there's really nothing else to say except we're going to talk about the plot briefly, a little bit of the characters, and then we'll talk about a few of the things that I found curious and or interesting. And with fiction podcasts in general, try to keep them pretty short. So this thing will be between 15 and 25 minutes, not too long. And then, yeah, at the end, if I have thought of the book I'm going to read, we'll talk about that. But I don't think we're going to know what book is going to be read next. Okay, so the basic plot outline, this is kind of going to be the plot outline as the book was advertised. It's not really the plot that I think, but I feel like it's best to introduce it the way it was introduced to me. So, the book takes place in Dickens, a fictional city that is supposed to be Compton, or Watts, some kind of South LA city, and it follows the adventures of Bon Bon, who is the titular sellout. Bon Bon's father was the local hood intellectual, something of a Jason Furious Styles from Boys in the Hood, Lawrence Fishburne's character. So from his father, Bon Bon inherits a farm. So that's why I think it's supposed to be Compton, because Compton used to have farmland. Bon Bon inherits a farm and an unconventional style of thinking that leads him into the peculiar institution of slavery. Bon Bon becomes the quote-unquote massa of a former childhood actor and local Dickens resident / celebrity, Hominy, who was the last surviving little rascal. So that's the way the book was advertised, like a black slave owner. That was the sensational thing that everybody latched onto. And that's what I always thought the book was going to be about. I kind of envisioned it being some kind of like Samuel Beckett-esque novel where like nothing happens for 150 pages and it's just meanderings on like the state of race in America, you know, but those meanderings being very long-winded, long sentences, block of text. That's what I imagined the book was going to be. I didn't think it was supposed to be funny, but then when I checked it out from my local library, on the front cover, NPR calls it a comic masterpiece, and that was my first clue that this was supposed to be a comic novel. I had no idea. So, I mean, because obviously, like, in some ways it's going to be comic, you know, because the idea, the premise of a black person being a slave owner in modern America is absurd. But I didn't think it was going to be handled in like the laugh out loud sense of the term funny. And that's what it's supposed to be. Anyway, that's not really the plot of the book. Like that aspect of the book is very small. It kind of helps drive the beginning and the end of the book. So they're kind of, the book is bookended by the fact that Bon Bon is charged with a crime. I can't remember what crime it is, but you know, obviously owning a slave is illegal. So he goes to the Supreme Court, and that's where the book opens, and that's where the book ends. And that's really as much as that matters for the book. What the book is actually about is that Dickens becomes it gets subsumed into South Los Angeles, so it ceases to be a place that exists. And so Bon Bon spends his entire time devoted to trying to get Dickens to be a place again. And that's really what the book is about. And, the metaphorical underpinnings of what that means are interesting enough. That, if a place isn't recognized, it ceases to exist, and that matters, just by simply not acknowledging that Dickens was a place with a history. You erase an entire people and all of their stories. It sounds more profound than it is in the book, because in the book it's simply not. And maybe you're supposed to read into it. Maybe the whole point is that you're supposed to read it and come away and draw your own conclusions. But if that's the case, I could have almost not read the book, But in that sense, there is something that it has in common with the moviegoer, where there's that great and often quoted passage about the idea that once your city is committed to celluloid, it's actually represented in a film, it becomes a real place. And before it's there, it's not in the collective consciousness of the people. And so it doesn't really exist. It's never been defined. There's something to that in this book, something like that. But again, it's not really what happens. Mostly the book is just meanderings, but not long-winded Beckett ones, more just musings. There's not really a plot to speak of. Just each chapter, Bon Bon gets up to some new hijink, and they're all kind of somewhat related. Basically, he tries to... I'm not really quite sure why, but he keeps trying to do performative reverse racism things. And I guess this is supposed to point out something about America. I failed to really get it. And it's possible I'm just dumb. I didn't think it made that good of a point. I didn't think it was a hilarious send-up. I didn't think it was a Swiftian satire. I didn't see it. Perhaps it's there. I couldn't find it. So that would be my first qualm with the book. I just didn't think that there was much of a plot, and I didn't think that all of the farce and all of the satire was biting. It didn't say anything to me that somebody couldn't have said much simpler, more concisely, and frankly in a much funnier way. Okay, so then let's just get into some nitty-gritty details and then a few unpopular opinions. So the other thing about this book, the plot, fine, whatever. A lot of books don't have a great plot. The allegory or whatever, I didn't love it. Okay, fine, that happens. But the language, right? We all go to books for language. And that was the thing. I just wasn't a fan of the language in this book. And there's many different aspects. So I've highlighted a few. The first one, it's not that I'm not a fan of this, it's just weird. And I think it'd be weird not to highlight it. In the book, N-words used a lot. It's in a black community in South LA, so you're going to hear it, but it's always spelled ER. But then at some point in the book, he points out somebody was pronouncing it with the hard R, but it's always spelled with the hard R. And why not just spell it with the variation, ending in GA? Why not do that? Is it supposed to be challenging us? But it's not challenging. It's just making me think it's two different words. It's not like it's offended my sensibility. It's just that when I read Nigga, right? Like Tupac said, I know that, I ought to know that the person saying it is a black person, probably saying it to another black person. And when I read a hard R, my mind goes elsewhere. Now, maybe the point is supposed to be that I'm lying to myself, and actually that word is the same no matter what. We haven't reappropriated anything. I don't know, but it definitely sticks out, at least to me. Okay, So that's the first thing. So that's throughout the book. All right. Then I've highlighted page 68, where this is like the first time we see Bon Bon goes to Homidy's house when he was a kid. He talks about how he met Hominy because he was a local celebrity, and the kids used to go over there and watch the old reruns of The Little Rascals. And there's this paragraph on page 68. It just jumps around so much. So I'll just read, a bit of it. So here it goes. When they found his house, Hominy would greet his devotees with a wide Paladin smile and an arthritic finger-wiggling high sign, inviting them in for high-C fruit punch and, if they were lucky, slices of my watermelon. I doubt that he told his aging fan base the same stories he shared with us. It's hard to say what started the love affair between me and Marpessa Delissa Dawson. She's 3 years older than me, and I've known her all my life. A lifelong resident of the farms. Okay, so that's what I mean. Like, we're talking about, and this is all one paragraph. We're talking about Hominy, and then suddenly we're talking about his love affair with Marpessa Delissa Dawson. And I get it. They met each other watching Little Rascals at Hominy's house, but it just feels, and then the paragraph goes on for a while and keeps jumping. And I'm not going to read all of it, but it does that there, right? And then on page 212, there's another one where he's talking about where he buried his father. His father dies early on. It's not a spoiler, but also you should know not to watch this if you're worried about spoilers. On one hand, right, somebody might read this and go oh, it's, this, he's got such great style. We start talking about his father and then we end up talking about apple varietals. Somebody might be impressed with that. They might like that. It's just not for me. So, that's one couple instances of the book just jumping around in the language sense, not even the plot, just from paragraph inside of paragraphs, from sentence to sentence. We just jump. And again, some people might like that riffing. It wasn't for me. But another thing that happens a lot is there's a lot of references, and specifically the way the references are pulled off, right? They're meant to, there's that rule of threes thing, in comedy. And it just feels like it happens every other sentence. So I highlighted this one on page 224. It's most of the way through the book. But it just stuck out to me all of a sudden that day, clearly. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Anyway, he soft shoe his way inside, bust out an insanely intricate song and dance routine from old Chitlin circuit days that would have made the Nicholas Brothers, Honey Coles, and Buck and Bubbles green with blackface envy. It just feels so, don't want to use the word contrived, but it's not contrived. It's just forcing. It's a little bit of the try hard. Hey, check it out. Nicholas Brothers, Honey Coles, and Buck and Bubbles green. You might know one of them. You won't know all three. And every reference in the book feels like that. To me. It feels hey, check it out. So I don't know. In a way, it feels like it was kind of bragging. Maybe I'm just wrong. Or maybe I'm sensitive. Maybe I was out hipstered and I'm upset about being out hipstered. Entirely possible. So, those are the aspects there. And then I guess if you didn't like those aspects, then you weren't going to find the book funny. So, like I said, NPR called it a comic masterpiece. I did not find it to be a comic masterpiece. And I think largely because of the language. So if you love the language, you'll love the book and you'll think it's funny. If you're like me and you didn't like the language, you won't like the book and you won't think it's funny. I think. There's probably some other cases out there. I don't know. But to me, that's how it broke down. Okay. Then a few unpopular opinions. And I don't know if these unpopular opinions are mine or Paul Beatty's. So you can tell me who you disagree with. But on page 97, he says, why you guys talk so black, dropping the G's in your gerunds here, but on your little public television appearances, you motherfuckers sound like Kelsey Grammer with her stick up his ass. So it seems like he's impugning code switching. And I guess the question is code switching bad? I don't know. I haven't read the latest discourse. my feeling is that nobody should be shamed into code switching, but that I think it's normal. Just like let's take it outside of like the workplace concept of code switching, you know, like, oh, you have to talk a certain way at work, and let's just take it to like groups of friends. You probably talk differently around a certain group of friends than another group of friends. So, and then if you have uh, multiracial friend groups, it might sound different at different times. I don't know. I really don't know if code switching is bad. I have no idea. I thought it was supposed to be an okay thing. I don't know. Me, I always sound like Kelsey Grammer with a stick up his ass. So, what can you do? All right, page 142. He is talking about, it doesn't matter what he's talking about. He says, to this day, whenever I'm feeling down and troubled, I crank Ricky Lee Jones, Joni Mitchell, Carole King from the Stereo, all of who were shouting out California way before Biggie, Tupac, or any of the Ice Coons. Now that's interesting. Shots fired at, obviously Ice Cube. And Ice Cube is a controversial figure, right? Because of things he says sometimes. But Ice-T, can't think of him having been controversial in that way. But I might be wrong. And then specifically the term coon, I wouldn't think of them as that. Like some kind of Uncle Tom insinuation there. I don't think so. And I'm not even talking about my opinion. Again, like it's like with the code switching question. Like what I'm asking is this what people generally think? Have I just been missing this? That Ice Cube and Ice-T are like a couple of coons? Is that what people think? I don't think that I've heard that opinion expressed too often. Of course, there's a certain level of fame where like every black celebrity gets, what do you call it? The third degree, especially recently, you've been seeing it happen in a bunch. But that's indie celebrity, right? But we're talking about black celebrities. So you're always going to come under a microscope. But outside of just that general idea, I hadn't heard this idea expressed that Ice-T and Ice Cube, who I assume he's talking about, I couldn't think of the other ices that he would be talking about, are coons. It's interesting. Okay, last one here. On page 143, they're talking about a book and how black women are described in the book. So he says, I'm so fucking tired of black women always being described by their skin tones, honey colored this, dark chocolate that. My paternal grandmother was mocha tinged, graham fucking cracker brown. How come they'd never describe the white characters in relations to food stuff and hot liquids? And my question here, I think I've talked about this before in a much earlier episode. I feel like this is just a very unfortunate thing because I think that on the face of things, it's not offensive, but like it's offensive because a certain group of people did it. You know what I mean? Like if organically black people just talked about themselves in that way, I don't think anybody'd be upset, Like if one black person says to another black person, right? And there wasn't all of the history of like, basically everything we covered in the Delectable Negro podcast. So there wasn't a history of white people trying to literally consume black people in like 7 different ways. Then it wouldn't be anything bad. But because of that, it ruins it. Because I actually think, like the food description thing I think is nice. I think any linguistic description that's good and sounds good is nice. And so it just sucks that we can't have that aesthetic among the many things that we can't have. But that aesthetic has been ruined because of 400 years of history and more than that. But we're just going with the 400 here. So anyway, those were what in that last unpopular opinion I think is not that unpopular, but just something I wanted to point out. So anyway, Paul Beatty, his book, I usually am not so negative about books on the podcast. The thing is, this book won the Booker Prize. It's doing fine. So, it's I'm not beating up on an indie author here. It was such a well received book, and I didn't quite get it. So if you got it, would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast. And yeah, that's gonna do it. The music here is by TheKeepRunning. Please subscribe to the podcast. We'll be going monthly from here on out. You can listen on Pocket Cast. That's what I listen on. Obviously, Spotify, Apple podcasts, all of those work. We're everywhere. Podbean, etc. If you want to check out other stuff that I'm doing, read the show notes. The project I mentioned that I'm working on, some things I've written, it's all in the show notes. And yeah, we'll be back next month. Something nonfiction for sure. So some kind of nonfiction read. If you have suggestions, please drop those. I'll do those. Would love to do a suggestion. And yeah, that's gonna do it. So until next time, stay safe, stay black, and keep reading.
This time enough at last. That's not fair. That's not fair at all. There was time now. There was all the time I needed. That's not fair. That's not fair.
Say something.